Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Adversary Emulation and the C2 Matrix. My name is Jessica Gallus, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Jorge Orchilles, SANS certified instructor and author. If during the webcast you have any questions for Jorge, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand over the webcast over to Jorge.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear about adversary emulation and the C2 matrix. I'm Jorge Orchilles, and these are two very exciting topics that I have been working on recently. I want to share with you to get some feedback. As mentioned, I'm Jorge Orchilles. I've been in an offensive security role for the past 9, almost 10 years at a large financial. During that time, I've also done some industry contributions, always trying to give back to the community that we all enjoy quite a bit. Things like the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. We just released version 3.1 and working hard on version 4. So if you have any comments on that, feel free to reach out. Also released a penetration testing framework with the Global Financial Markets Association. I'm a SANS instructor and a course author of a Red Team course. This discussion today is really a hour-long kind of sneak peek at that course. I participate quite a bit in the community. I've been with ISSA for 9 years, served as the president of the South Florida chapter for 3 years, and was just honored with the ISSA Fellow designation. In my past life, I wrote a book that no one should be purchasing today because it's on Windows 7 and that's end of life, and you should not have any more of those in your environment, right? So without further ado, real quick, I am on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you want to follow me or connect with me, that is the best way to get updates on red teaming, adversary emulations, and the C2 matrix. So what are we talking about? We're going to talk about adversary emulation. This is a fairly newer term in the offensive security space. Before we talk about how we got there, I kind of want to talk what we did in the past and what most organizations should be doing. Adversary emulation is a more mature offensive security type of exercise, and we should really be doing the basics, covering our basic hygiene to get started. If you're not doing some of these items I'm going to talk about now, adversary emulation might not be for you. So we start out with vulnerability scanning. I'm sure most of you already do this. You take a scanner, whether you're scanning an IP address or a URL, something like a Nessus or an Expose or a Qualys, and you point it to some IP addresses. You hit go and you get a pretty large report back with a lot of vulnerabilities. You can then show those vulnerabilities to the stakeholders and have them patch and fix their issues. Or you can go a step further and do what's vulnerability assessment. This does require someone with some ethical hacking knowledge to go through those vulnerabilities and analyze them, as the term suggests. You want to actually verify the vulnerabilities. And when you give a report to your stakeholders, you are giving actual vulnerabilities that you verified that are not false positive. That way, no one's wasting their time. They're going after and fixing vulnerabilities that have been deemed to actually exist. But that takes a little bit of human power. After that, most organizations will mature to doing penetration testing. The major difference between a penetration test and a vulnerability assessment is that in a penetration test, you're actually going to exploit the particular vulnerability. You're going to get access. That often leads you to a shell or to some sort of user level access on a system. And from there, you can go a little deeper, identify the correct business risk, go further, maybe even move laterally. But it really depends on the scope. And that's where we see a large difference between traditional penetration testing and the red team. Red teaming is the ability to perform tactics, techniques, and procedures like a malicious adversary would. And it's very difficult to explained these to a number of folks that use these terms back and forth. But most of the time, what we're seeing is penetration tests are limited in scope. They might give you an IP address or a domain or maybe in a range and say, you can only hack these systems. And once you get access, don't do anything else. And we see that quite a bit. For example, when PCI DSS, if any of you have done a pen test there, you notice that the scope is quite limited. It's limited to a certain segmented network. But attackers don't have these same limitations. They don't have these rules of engagements. And then as an industry, we've matured to red teaming. Red teaming performs a much wider scope of tests. They often do this through physical testing as well. We created the red team. From there, some organizations might have heard or start doing what's called purple teaming. That is very similar to red teaming, but instead of doing blind tests where your blue team has no idea that you're coming, here you actually plan ahead of time and you work together with the blue teams and the security operations center, the incident response folks, all together seeing and kind of going through each tactic, technique, and procedure. And then you can finally get to a point where you're doing some continuous purple teaming, which is slightly more efficient. Now, as you move through here, I'm not saying one is more important than the other or that you should stop doing the previous. You should definitely continue doing vulnerability scanning, vulnerability assessment, and pen testing. And certain times, based on goals, you will have and perform various different assessments. So adversary emulation I've defined as a type of red team exercise where the red team is emulating how an adversary operates. So you use threat intelligence, you understand a particular adversary, and then you do the same tactics, techniques, and procedures with the same goals and objectives as that realistic threat. The goal here is to do a full end-to-end attack. You generally start out on the internet, just like a malicious adversary that you are emulating, and you perform the full kill chain, which we'll talk a little bit about in this conversation. So to go a little deeper into red teaming, what is red team? According to a red team journal, it's the practice of looking at a problem or situation from the perspective of an adversary. In information security, this can be applied in various ways. We're going to cover adversary emulations here. Those could be blind red team engagements or non-blind purple team type of engagements. But it can also be social engineering. For example, sending each of your employees or staff a phishing-like email with a unique URL. If they click on it, you know who fell for it. That's a great way to perform awareness training and to season the staff to ensure that they don't fall for real attacks. You also have some tabletop exercises or war gaming. These are generally non-technical. I'll give a shout out to Black Hills Information Security with their backdoors and breaches card game that allows you to do these tabletop type of exercises. These, again, are non-technical. In this case, we're going to talk about the more technical ones, really focusing on adversary emulations, understanding the adversary, and then emulating them. So some red team specific terms, just to make sure we're all speaking the same language as I go through here. I know I might have mentioned some already, but an adversary and a threat is an agent that would likely target you or can cause damage. The blue team is anyone that works in defense. So your security operations center, your incident response, generally your operations teams, your engineering teams. I would even argue that everyone is part of the blue team because anyone that receives a phishing email should be reporting that, in which case they are now helping you defend your organization. Command and control is one of my favorite topics, and that's what we'll jump into quite a bit here. It's probably the most important tactic for an adversary, unless they're creating a worm that propagates by itself and reaches its objective without communication. Command and control is pretty important. You need to be able to have command and control over the machines that you compromise and be able to move laterally and reach your objective. And lastly, as I mentioned, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Tactics are adversary goals at a high level. We'll look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework shortly. This is what an attacker wants to do. For example, initial access. The techniques are various different ways to achieve that goal. And then procedures are the use cases, or exactly how they did each of those techniques. So let's jump into it. Why do we do this? Well, one of the main reasons is for an end-to-end assessment of the entire organization. Now, you can argue that the original idea of doing penetration testing was to look at an entire organization and see how far you can go in. But nowadays, the industry and a lot of regulatory requirements and definitions are really pushing penetration testing to testing technology. So we differentiate here with red teaming, because red teaming is testing people, process, and technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. It's not a limited scope test. You don't have just a certain amount of IPs or URLs or times that you can test, maybe only weekends or nights, right? You are actually emulating a malicious attacker, which does not have any of those limitations. We want to talk and do the full cyber kill chain, right? This is one of the earlier frameworks by Lockheed Martin that started with recon and ended with an objective. We want to do all of those. Most of these red team engagements are blind. When you're not doing a blind engagement, then we like to call that a purple team engagement, where you're working together with the blue team. And lastly, you want to determine what tactics, techniques, and procedures would work undetected if a true attack occurred, and how you can remediate this, maybe create some sort of detection or better processes to identify the adversary and contain them. Another main reason for doing this is measuring the effectiveness of the people, process, and technology. We often see this when we read the FireEye or Mandiant reports, right, that just came out. We saw the dwell time there and the dwell time going down. We generally do this as incident response. We go backwards. We identify that someone got in, and then we try to figure out all the times before. When you do this on the red team perspective, the red team will be taking very good notes. They know exactly what time that phishing email was sent, when it was clicked, when their command and control received a new agent connection, when they moved laterally, when they executed various different TTPs, and you can measure all that. In blind testing, you will also have certain trusted agents, which we'll cover shortly. They can also measure the blue team detection. How long did it take them to detect a particular system getting compromised? How long did it take them to contain it, to eradicate it, etc.? And then we also want to look at the processes. Generally, you have different levels in a security operations center. Maybe level 1 saw an alert. They looked into it. Did they escalate it? Did level 2 or whatever process you have look at it? When did it become an event? Was the handoff correct? Were there correct people? Did they receive communication? All of these measurements you can do in a red team engagement, which makes it's a lot harder to do in an actual incident. And then lastly, we like to test assumptions. We trust but want to verify. Generally, we'll hear that a particular attack won't work here because we applied all our patches, or we have outbound data leakage prevention, or we have multi-factor authentication. Or the latest one that we've heard since the beginning of the year is, can the Iranians breach us? So we can test all of these and give senior management a good idea of our holistic security posture. And training and improving the blue team. It's not about winning. There's an excellent book by Joe Vest and James called Red Team Operations. They do a great job illustrating this. It's not about winning. It's about making security better. So every time you train, think of a boxer. Every time before that main fight, they train and they train and they train. This is exactly what you're doing. Every red team exercise will result in the blue team getting better. Not only the people, but the process and the technologies as well. So that's for why we want to do red teaming. So we talk about how to actually do this. We obviously need to look at frameworks and methodologies. I will only spend one slide on that because I hear all the technical people sighing in unison. So there's a number of frameworks here. We have the cyber kill chain from Lockheed Martin. That was one of the first ones. We bash it because it's short. It only has 7 steps. It doesn't really cover what happens once you get initial access and command and control all the way through action on objectives. But we forget that this cyber kill chain actually got us in front of senior management and board members. They see the cyber kill chain and they know what you're talking about, which is very important when we provide value. These other frameworks in the middle here, the ones from CBEST, the ones from Tiber EU, are mostly regulatory type frameworks that require this threat-led type of red team exercise, these adversary emulations. And all these are public. You can look at these up. And this is actually what led us to create the framework for the regulatory use of penetration testing and red teaming in the financial services industry. It's what I based this course off of, and I'll show you a little bit more of that shortly. And then, of course, we have the industry standard, MITRE's ATT&CK framework. This is one everyone should be familiar with. It stands for adversaries, tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. It allows us all to speak the same language. The red team, the blue team, the cyber threat intelligence team, we can see and talk about an incident or a red team exercise or some threat intelligence all with the same language. And then lastly, a big shout out to Paul Poles with the Unified Cyber Kill Chain. He took a number of these kill chains and created the Unified Cyber Kill Chain, which I also model here, so I'll show you that in a bit. This is our mandatory slide on MITRE's ATT&CK matrix. MITRE has done a great job in supporting this for the community. It is open. If you have any new techniques or procedures, you can let them know. They have a portal. You talk to them. They're very active in various areas. They're all in RSA right now. And you can let them know things that you see out there. If you got a breach, if you did incident response and found something that doesn't map here, let them know. At the top row, you have the tactics. These are the attacker goals. And then each square under that is an individual technique. We will have some sub-techniques coming out in the next few months. And then if you click on any of these, available at attack.mitre.org, you can see procedures for each individual one. And this is important because when threat intelligence is received, they can map to it. When red team is creating an adversary emulation plan, they can map to it. Blue team, whenever they have a breach or a real incident, they can map to what the malicious actor actually did. It really offers us a common language that we all understand. So for this course and many organizations doing these blind red team exercises, or even if they want to do this non-blind as a purple team, we have a framework. That framework is listed here. This is a hybrid approach of the ones that we showed earlier. Many times we'll start with threat intelligence. And you don't have to do a big exercise. Threat intelligence could be a quick one. It could be a small exercise. For example, a new proof of concept code came out, or new ODA vulnerabilities out there, or a new technique was released. You consume this threat intelligence, and then you plan. You plan what you're going to do. If it's going to be a blind test, then a lot more planning will have to go into scope. You will cover a number of various different things, such as attack infrastructure, which I'll highlight shortly, from the red team perspective. And then, of course, you do the testing, and this is everyone's favorite part. You actually run the test, try to emulate this malicious actor, and then you get to the closure. The closure, the exercise closure, is a number of things that really change and really show the difference between a pen test and a red team. In the closure portion of your test, you're going to analyze and see what the responses were from the initial time that you got access or you compromised a system or any of the systems you compromised. What was the response? How did the processes work? What were the times to detect? And then you create your report like most of the time, and it leads to remediation and action plan. I have a very nice section at the end here of a great way that you can use a tool called Vector to track these exercises and show value as you do more red team engagements over time. Now, threat intelligence is very important. If you're going to do an adversary emulation, Like I said, we want to map the tactics, techniques, and procedures. Here's an example of a FireEye report released in 2018 that has a paragraph. I went through that paragraph and I pulled out information and I tagged it to MITRE ATT&CK. So as you can see in the beginning, it says the payload was an auto IT downloader. Auto IT, I know that. That's a software. It's F0129. And then you read through and it says that that downloader retrieved and executed additional PowerShell. PowerShell is a technique. It's T1086 on MITRE ATT&CK. Then there was also information that they pulled it from this HTTPS IP. This is an IP address. This is still threat intelligence, but this is more an indicator of compromise that maybe the blue team will find useful here, but not so useful for us as red team. We're not going to actually use the same IP address or try to buy the same domain. As you could continue to go through, you'll see PowerSploit is on there. You'll have a hash value. That's another IOC. You have Mimikatz. You have process dumping. And you have a vulnerability that was exploited, which is also linked to exploitation for privilege escalation in Technique 1068. So you read through these reports. You pull out these various different TTPs for the adversary that you're going to emulate. Now, in choosing the adversary emulate, you do need to know a little more about the target company, what industry would they work with, what countries, or use the threat intelligence that they already have if you're a consultant. If you're internal, then you should already have a good idea of what adversaries are likely to attack you. If not, you should definitely figure that out, and because those are the ones that you're going to want to emulate. Now, that sounded like a whole lot of work. So if you don't want to do all that work, you can use Attack Navigator. Attack Navigator is another free offering by the folks at MITRE that let you choose various different threat actors and select their TTPs. I took the liberty here of doing APT33, an Iranian threat actor, given that that's what's been in the news for the last month and a half. And you can see I've turned those fields into red. So APT33 uses a spear phishing link as the technique to gain initial access. They also use valid accounts by doing password spraying. They execute code through exploitation, through PowerShell, through scheduled tasks. They do privilege escalation through exploitation for privilege escalation and scheduled tasks as well. And as you can see, I'm not going to read them all because you can do that. You just select on the top right where it says selection controls, which actor you want TTPs for, and that almost creates a nice little adversary emulation plan for you. Moving on to the planning phase. There's a lot to do in the planning phase, especially if you're doing a blind red team exercise. You will need a number of things. For example, trusted agents. These are often referred to as white cell or white team. This is the limited number of people in the organization that have knowledge that this exercise is going to happen. Sometimes in smaller organizations, it might just be the CISO or the head of information security. In larger organizations, you'll probably have more people involved. And really, they need to maintain that this exercise is not an exercise, that it's a real attack. Because remember we said we're measuring people's behavior and their time to detect. What we've realized is that when anyone realizes that they are being tested in an exercise or that it's just an exercise, their time and their priorities change. They no longer act under the same understanding that this is a real attacker, and it will skew your results. So trusted agents are important to have throughout. They're also the folks that will meet on a daily basis based on your communication plan, for instance, in the morning or in the afternoon, just to go through the various steps that have been performed. So, for example, if we got initial access on this day, at the end of the day, we'll have a briefing and let the team know that. You also do what's called deconfliction. Throughout your exercise, I'm sure the malicious actors will still be attacking that target organization like they do every other day. You want to deconflict that and make sure that everyone knows what is red team and what is not, but leave it to only those trusted agents. Then you have your rules of engagement. Here's also where we see pen testing really limit what we can do. We, as a red team or a pen tester, only allowed to test certain hours, only allowed to test these non-production systems. You can't move laterally here. Those rules should not apply in an actual adversary emulation type of scenario. You are doing the same thing a malicious actor would do. So you have rules for blue team, which is to carry out all their activities as a regular incident would. Make sure that they communicate. Make sure that they continue to work as if it's not an exercise. If they do realize it, most of the time, towards the end, they find out that it is an exercise. And then the rules for the red team are more limited to communicating on a daily basis or however long you need, and to not bring down any business processes. It's generally a bad thing. Then through this planning, the red team can get to work. And I know that's what most of you are here for. So on attack infrastructure, I could talk about this for a day, but just high level, you want to procure the same services that malicious actors are using. Those are generally cloud services. Favorites are AWS, GCP, DigitalOcean. You pick whatever your favorite provider is and create virtual machines. You're going to purchase domain names. You're going to create TLS certificates. If you're going to do phishing, like 91%, I believe, was the last number I saw of most breaches start with phishing, you will need to set up mail servers. If you don't already have them, you need to build reputation, so plan that ahead. You might need to set up phishing or credential theft type sites. You may need to categorize your domains based on the security that the target organization has. You might need to do that. You then need to set up your command and control, and that's what we're going to dive into here now. Generally, you are going to have short and long haul C2 infrastructure. That means your short hauls will call back to you at smaller intervals so that you can do more tactical types of movement, do discovery, etc. And then your long hauls are for when your short hauls get caught and removed, which is the whole point here, is for blue team to catch you. You will have your long hauls that they won't catch, and you can be stealthy through there. And then, of course, you'll have some custom command and control tooling, and you want to test any of this communication. You want to be operationally secure. So throughout all of this is where I reached and started the C2 Matrix project. This is a matrix of command and control frameworks for red teamers. That's how I started it. I started it because we were doing adversary emulations. And for a particular threat actor, how do you know which C2 framework to use that will allow you to do the most or emulate the most tactics, techniques, and procedures with the fewest amount of frameworks? At the same time, I was also delivering the 2-day SANS course. Took about 4 to 5 months to complete, and I was using Empire for that. PowerShell Empire is probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular, command and control framework, and it's very consistent, and that is something you need in a classroom environment. When people are going through this for the first time, you want it to work. Most of you that do pen testing or red teaming know it rarely works the first time, right? But if you're in a class environment, we wanted it to work. So we chose the best framework there was, which was Empire. 2 months later, the original developers, and thank you very much for all that development work on there, we love it, they announced it was an end of life. So I said, all right, let's start looking at different C2s. I started asking around, and that is how the project started. So there is no right or wrong here. There is no better or worse framework. You will just be able to choose what the ideal one is for your engagement. We'll talk a little bit more about that now. So as I mentioned, the mission of the C2 Matrix is to find the best modern replacement for Empire, one that's reliable, consistent, user-friendly, and meets our requirements. And our requirements started growing. We wanted something that's operationally secure. We don't want to get caught or hacked on our infrastructure, on our attack infrastructure. We want to have multiple command and control channels, really based on the adversary you are emulating. What channels do they use? Most of the time, you'll see HTTP being one of the main channels. But you want to list, what does each one of these have? Then you also want different agents and payloads. Are you going after Macs? Are you going after Linux systems? Are you going after Windows systems? Are you going after Android? what are you going after? You need to be able to create agents that interact with that command and control server you're setting up. We also want custom profiles because blue teams will fingerprint these command and control servers. They want, and we want to remain stealthy, so we want to be able to customize what we do. We also want some domain fronting capabilities. This is used very common. It's one of the main techniques under the command control tactic in MITRE. So the ability to do that. The ability of being proxy aware. Many corporate organizations use proxies. And you want to be able to pivot. So if I fish one person inside an organization, I want to use that system to be able to move laterally without having other systems also calling out to my command and control. We do it all through this particular beachhead. We want multi-user capability because that's the team part of Red Team, and community involvement to see if these C2s are actually used by others and tested and really understand. I started looking around and there are 35 frameworks today. When I released this project in November at SANS Hackfest, believe we only had 28 or so. So these continually come out. I want to thank all contributing developers for all of these. You are the real MVPs. Thank you for all your hard work. And here's the list of frameworks that we have. Just look at all those C2s. Quite a bit. And at first, I only thought there was a few. You'd hear about Covenant, or you hear about Cobalt Strike, obviously, is one of the main ones used by Red Teams, and a lot of other ones popping up and with various different frameworks. So I had to set some parameters, or phases, if you will, or time was going to run out. I only had about 3 months to do this, and my talk had already been accepted. I couldn't just go and make stuff up. So I decided that I could only evaluate and document all the C2s and focus on the communication channel. Then phase 2 would be creating how-tos for the most popular C2s so other people can try them. And then document post-exploitation features like lateral movement tactic. And maybe even do attack mapping so that we can pick an adversary, see their TTPs, and then show us what adversary or what C2 is likely has the most coverage for those TTPs. And then phase 3 is really open just for anyone to contribute. I spoke at Art into Defense, a conference on defense, so definitely felt like an imposter there. Giving this presentation, the feedback was great, and they want more detection type solutions built in. So this is, like I said, an open source project. If anyone's interested, definitely let me know. From the Red Team perspective, though, let's talk about channels. This was one of the most important ones. I mentioned earlier, most command and control and what adversaries are using is using HTTP. So that's generally one of the more important channels that we're going to look at. HTTP has the ability to be proxy aware, to do domain fronting, and to have a custom profile. We have our traditional TCP listeners, so that the client establishes an outbound TCP connection. We have HTTP2, which you might or might not allow in your network or in your target organization network. HTTP3. DNS, this is generally a channel that we're always testing. This is not very quick. It's better for those long-haul type of communications. Then you have DOH, that's DNS over HTTPS. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the browsers are turning this on by default. So you might have this traffic in your organization and not even know it. ICMP, FTP, and IMAP, some of the more traditional clear text channels. Now, most of these command and control frameworks do what's called beaconing. That means that the agent, the computer you compromise, will call out to your server every so often. You should be able to configure that time. For a short haul, you can do it every minute, every 10 minutes, you call out. Or you can have a consistent connection. But generally a consistent connection, say over HTTP, looks really shady. Most blue teams will catch that because HTTP is not a protocol. It's supposed to be a consistent connection. It sends, gets, and you get requests back. So things like Meterpreter, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, is that consistent type of connection. Other things that we like to see are called jitter. So you set up your beacon to call back, say, every 10 seconds, and then you set a jitter. Why? If a server or system, an endpoint, is making a connection out every 10 seconds, that's a pretty easy pattern to identify. So you can change that and you can add a jitter. A jitter is a percentage. So for instance, if you put a 50% jitter on a 10-second beacon, it can beacon out anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds. And that's if I did math correctly. If I didn't, I apologize. But that's how jitters work. So that's kind of important. We also had a feature called working hours. It's a nice feature on Empire that most people, especially endpoints, they don't work 24 hours a day. I mean, maybe 12 hours is normal, but definitely not 24. So you can set the working hours to say 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and only have command and control communication during those times. So it's quite interesting feature. You also have the kill date. The kill date is important for us from the cleanup perspective. What happens if we deploy 10 of these agents all over the network? They're calling out, and then the blue team catches our command and control server and blocks that communication. The agent will continue to run on all those compromised endpoints. It will continue to call out, and when will it stop? If it's memory only, maybe when the system reboots. If you added persistence, then it'll probably stay there a lot longer. So you can set a kill date, and that is when your agent will stop communicating out to the C2 server and generally cleans up after itself. It's something that I cared about, decided to test. The C2 profile is an example from Empire. You can set various different things, such as the user agent. Every browser has a user agent. If the blue team is looking at user agents outbound and they have Chrome and Firefox, and all of a sudden you send a user agent that doesn't match that, you could get caught. So you should be able to modify those. You should modify the default profile of what site continually gets pulled. In this case, you see that /admin/get.php, /news.php, /login, /process.php. That is what anyone that is seeing this over clear text, or if they're decrypting HTTPS, will be seeing the requests going out. And then you have a staging key. The staging keys are important for operational security, that even if you use a clear text channel like FTP or ICMP or DNS, you have a cryptographically secure connection between your agent and your server. So all of these should be modifiable in the C2 frameworks that you're looking into. Then we looked at user agents. A lot of user interfaces. A lot of them were command line interfaces only. Some had some sort of graphical user interface. Some allowed a web interface, when generally multi-user, where different people can log in and interact together like a team. And some have APIs. So we added all those as factors to look into as well. And then agents. Where can you create agents for? Can you create Windows payloads? Can you create Android, Linux, or Mac? And then on the operational security side, as I mentioned earlier, you want a cryptographically secure communication between your agents and your C2 servers. So looked into those. Most use encrypted key exchange. That is a key that is known by both systems. Another one, for example, Merlin use opaque, which allows a dynamic key to be created as the connection is established. You have AES, MTLS, etc. We also wanted warnings for bad OPSEC. For instance, if you were going to run a shell, and you can see the screenshot here on the bottom right, on Sliver. If you run shell, it says, this action is bad OPSEC. Are you an adult? Which I obviously answered no to, and I didn't get a shell. It's a good warning system so that you don't get caught. And then you need to know your IOCs. This is very important for Red Team. Before you run or do anything in the target environment, you need to know what indicators of compromise you're going to be leaving behind and how the blue team can catch you. So for this, I ran Sysmon onto the Windows systems, Wireshark and TCP dump on the Linux systems and Windows systems to see what the traffic looked like, make sure it was actually encrypted, and make sure that everything advertised actually worked. As for my testing infrastructure, I created a pfSense firewall with multiple zones. One zone was the attacker zone. I tried to do everything on Kali. For certain ones, they just did not want to work on Kali. As a little sneak peek to all of you that are on here and listening, working with the offensive security folks, so the next version of Kali will have a number of the C2 matrix C2s that work there without too much trouble, which is quite nice. People will be able to access some of these C2s a lot easier. And then some servers are Windows only. And then our victims on the other side are Mac, Windows, and Ubuntu is what I use for testing. So without further ado, we'll jump over to a demo here. If you want to play along, look at the screen or go to the c2matrix.com. So I'll show you the ugly version first. And this is the golden source. The Google Sheet has the latest and most up-to-date info because it is the easiest to update. So over here on the left side, you have all your different command and control frameworks. You can see that's 32 of them. Yes, there are a couple that are not filled out. That really bothers me. If anyone has experience with any of these, let me know and let's evaluate them. You can see who evaluated these. Big shout out to all the contributors, when they were evaluated, on what day. The license. So most of these are open source. They have various different licenses, and some are commercial. You have the price for the commercial ones. You have the version that's reviewed. The implementation. How did we install it? Sometimes we use Docker, sometimes pip, sometimes it was binary, sometimes it was install.sh. That's what we used, and that's how it was successful for us. Then there's does it work on Kali or not? If you are a Kali fan, there you know which ones will work smoothly. Then the server-side code. You'll see a lot of Python on the server-side code, some PowerShell, some Go, some PHP. That's the server side. That's your C2 server. And then your agents. Most agents are created dynamically to connect to your server, and they require one of these languages. You'll see Python there. You'll see Go. You'll see Swift. You'll see Java, C#, etc. Then you have the UI. Which ones are multi-user? Which are not or have some sort of other UI? And do they have an API? Then we get to our channels. As I mentioned, all the different channels you can see here, most of them have HTTP, but I saw someone ask which framework is best for DNS. That's a great question. You can actually go here and just take a look. Cobalt Strike does DNS, Godot does DNS, Innuendo, Site, Sliver, and Weasel. Or which one does DNS over HTTPS? You can see Godot does that. And then you keep scrolling over here on the right. I'm sure everyone knows how to use a spreadsheet. You have the various different agents, which one work on Windows, Linux, or Mac, depending on your attack. The key exchange. Some of these don't have key exchanges. That's obviously not good. Some of them do. This is Merlin, the one I was talking about, that has a pretty interesting key exchange. Some have steganography. Some are proxy aware. Some can do domain fronting. Some can do custom profiles. Some allow jitter and some don't. Some have working hours, really only Empire. It's really a feature I haven't seen anyone else implement. You have your kill dates, your chaining. Can I use that one agent that I deployed to then chain and move laterally with it? Does everything log? Very important logging for doing red team engagements. Which one's actively maintained? You'll see some of here are not maintained. I will point out right now that everyone says you started this project because Empire was end of life, but it shows that's maintained, and that is correct. Empire is now maintained by BC Security. They actually released version 3.06 recently, and they even sent out a teaser of creating a web UI for it. So it is actively maintained. Some of these have Slack and a pretty good community. Some are on Twitter. You have different sites. their GitHubs, their GitHub issues, if support matters to you, how-tos, and then some notes. So this was the original project, but then I said I have to make this a little prettier. So I worked with my collaborators at site, particularly Sean from their team, created this website. This website is the c2matrix.com, and it has two things. It has Ask the Matrix, where you can fill out different questions, and it factors out what you need. So do you need a C2 that supports multiple users? Yes, I need multiple users. Next, it automatically filtered out what you need. You need HTTPS and maybe, let's say, DNS. You'll see it filters out quite quickly, and it will allow you to choose your C2 much faster. It also has a nicer graphical view of the matrix. You can see this is a lot easier on the eyes than a spreadsheet. You can look at the code and the UI, the various different channels, the agents, the capabilities, and the support. Everything we just went through right now. So I'll jump back into the presentation. Once you have your C2 set up, you can go through and emulate the attacker. Now, I'm not going to jump into any of this due to time, but this is Paul Pohl's unified kill chain. You can see it's broken up more into what attackers actually do and what red teamers are doing all the time. The initial foothold has the most steps, requires you to do the recon, set up your command and control, create a weaponized agent or payload, deliver it, generally through social engineering, get access to the system, and evade defenses. Then you have your internal network where you do network propagation. You discover information about your target network, what EDR is being used, what various different security controls they have. Are they logging? Where do I need to go? Gain some situational awareness, maybe escalate privileges, and then move laterally. All until you actually get to your action on objectives, which have various different tactics: collection, exfiltration, target manipulation, and your actual objective. So you do all of that because you're an awesome pen tester or red teamer, and then you get to the closure. And this is really one of the main differentiators, again, between red teaming and pen testing. Here, you want to measure the success and failures. What TTPs were prevented? Why were they prevented? You want to document that. You want to document the good and the bad. What was detected and how long did it take? What was the time to contain, the time to eradicate? Were the processes followed? This is a big one that we're not used to testing in our pen tests. We generally just find issues in technology or issues with people clicking through social engineering. But what about the processes? Are the processes broken? If the SOC detected something within 2 minutes, but the incident response team didn't get to it in 7 days, I would say you have a process problem. How do you measure that? That's a big differentiator. One of the main things I want to do here is use Vector, and I mentioned this one earlier. Vector is an awesome tool by security risk advisors. It is open source, it's free. If you know how to use Docker, you will be able to set this up quite easily. And you can create your adversary emulation plans here. Each test case, which you see right now, an example of MITRE ATT&CK, has the red team side and the blue team side. The red team fills out the red team, the blue team fills out the blue team. This is great for blind red team tests and for purple team exercises. You can actually map this out to the various phases, to the technique ID in MITRE ATT&CK, and fill out the various different commands, because remember, every technique has multiple procedures. You will never get to 100% prevention of all the MITRE matrix. There's new procedures or test cases coming out all the time. So in this case, we did Mimikatz through PowerShell, and then we worked with the blue team. They were able to detect it, and we expected them to be able to detect this with both EDR and endpoint protection. So good job for McAfee Endpoint and Carbon Black. What was the alert severity? What was the detection time? The attacker also has the same info. And the reason I like to use Vector, and yes, it does take you a bit to go through this and fill it out, is because you can then create various different reports. This top report here, remember that senior management really remembers the cyber kill chain, but always forgets every time you mention that attack framework. Well, here they have a view with the kill chain. How did APT33 gain initial access? Through spear phishing. Then what did they do? How did they evade defenses? How did they do persistence? How was their command and control? You can see all the various test cases there on the top. On the bottom, you have different test cases as well, along with their status. Did you complete the test case? What was the outcome? Was it detected or was it prevented? Remember, a lot in MITRE ATT&CK will be detected, not necessarily through an alert, but may be detected. And really what you want to do is put these chains together, these attack chains. It also allows you to create these heat maps. Heat maps are good to have an idea of where you stand. By the way, all of this is sample data from SRA, sorry. And you can see here that one particular technique, for example, file system permissions, had two different test cases done. And you can see that there's very weak detection or alerting on that, while there might be, say, full protection against LLMNR and NBTNS because it's disabled or whatnot. So Vector is a great way of doing and tracking red team and purple team exercises. Again, it's free and I highly recommend it. So that leads us to our conclusion here. I would like to open it up for questions. If you have any, I see some already coming in. Go ahead and add those there. While you are submitting your questions, I do want to give a shout out to a new Hackfest, Rocky Mountain Hackfest Summit and Training. Is going to be in Colorado. I will be the co-chair of this summit. It's going to be a 2-day summit. We have a lot of fun things planned, but related to the C2 matrix, we will have a C2 workshop where anyone could come in and try. We'll read the how-to for that particular command and control and perform it against a target environment that involves Active Directory, an Exchange server, some Windows hosts, some Windows endpoints, some Linux servers, etc. So you can actually get hands-on time with the C2 matrix and various C2s. So with that, thank you all for joining. Here's my info. Someone asked if I'm going to post the slides. Yes. If you follow @Jorge, I had a scheduled tweet to go out 2 minutes ago. Hopefully it went out, and you will have a link there for my slide share that has these slides. I also, if you're interested in the course, I'm teaching it 4 times this year at the Wild West Hackfest. Is the next one, and 3 other offerings. The link is there. So I'll now take your questions. Let me take a look here. Slide deck available? Yes. Is it recommended to set up a different mail server for each pen test engagement? Yes. I actually recommend you set up new attack infrastructure for every engagement. I know it's a pain, but using the same domains or even the same hosts is bad operational security. Many consulting companies have been caught like this. I'm not going to name them, but definitely do not use the same mail server attack infrastructure over and over. The name of the company that produced the flashcards. It's a game. It's Black Hills Information Security. I believe it's called Backdoors and Breaches, and it's a tabletop exercise. Someone asked what framework is best for DNS channel. I covered that one. How can you access the spreadsheet shown? The spreadsheet is available. If you go to the C2 matrix, you go to the actual matrix over here on the right, you scroll down, the source right down here, sorry for making it so small, this spreadsheet is public and you can access it. I highly recommend that one. You can also visit the C2 matrix on Twitter, and all that information is there for updates and whatnot. It's all on C2 Matrix Twitter. You can see here the public Google Doc, as well as other updates. For example, that sneak peek of Empire having a web UI is on there. Other tweets, for example, someone using an AWS Lambda as a redirector for C2, and various other announcements like Red Elk, etc. It's all on Twitter is probably the best way to get your updates. Can Vector interface with other tools? I have not done that. I do not know the answer. Definitely check with them. Their team is awesome at providing features and bug fixes. So again, that's Security Risk Advisors. Their site is vector.io. Vector.io. There you go. The sample data, yes, it comes if you use the GitHub repo. It has a data set of just sample data, in particular for purple teaming, and shows various different historical trends so that you can show your management how you have gotten better exercise over exercise. Did you find it difficult to emulate traffic that will generate on a test network before engagement? I think the hardest thing with most of these C2s was getting them installed. Some of them are not as trivial as they might look, but once you understand how command and controls work, you first set up a listener, then you create an agent, you create a way to weaponize that agent, that payload through a phishing email or HTA, etc. It's not too hard. And I think that covers everything. And thanks for all the jokes on here as well. I heard you cough. Are you sick with the coronavirus? No, I don't think so. Did you say a tool to report the status of red, blue? Yep. So I think that covers everything. And we're actually 3 minutes out. So if you have any other questions, find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter, connect with me. I love this stuff, and thank you all for your time. I know your time is precious, so I appreciate you spending some time here with me talking about this. So I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, George, for your presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.